My name is Owen Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a ranger with the National Park Service for 11 years. The first 9 were at Mount Rainier. The last 2 have been at the Hoh Rainforest Station on the Olympic Peninsula in the northwest corner of Washington State. In my time at the Hoh, we've had 14 disappearances, not deaths, disappearances, no remains, no clothing, no gear, no DNA evidence, no signs of animal predation, no ransom demands, no suicide notes, no records of voluntary departure. 14 human beings walked into that rainforest and simply ceased to exist. Search and rescue teams found nothing. Cadaver dogs sat down and whined, and every single investigation ended the same way. The file gets stamped inconclusive. The family gets a phone call no one wants to make, and the forest keeps growing. I used to think there were explanations. Exposure, disorientation, falls into ravines we hadn't mapped. I spent my first 3 months at the Hoh looking for logical answers the way a drowning man looks for the surface. I was good at it too. I had 9 years of backcountry experience. I'd pulled hikers off cliffs in whiteout conditions, extracted a Boy Scout troop from a flash flood on the Nisqually, and talked a suicidal man down from the rim of a volcanic crater at 11,000 feet. I knew wilderness. I knew what killed people in wild places, and I knew the signs it left behind. None of those signs were here. And eventually, I stopped looking for them. Because the Hoh doesn't operate by the rules I learned at Rainier. It has rules of its own. I transferred to the Hoh Rainforest Station in October of 2022, which was my first mistake. Not the transfer itself, the timing. October in the Hoh is when the tourist season dies and the rain comes in for the long stay, 80 inches between October and March, the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as inhabit the air. Everything turns. The moss, which already covers every surface in the temperate months, seems to deepen and thicken, climbing higher on the big leaf maples like something reaching. The light goes gray and stays gray. Sunset comes at 4:30, and by 5 the forest is so dark you'd think someone pulled a curtain over the entire peninsula. I wanted the Hoh posting. I'd requested it specifically. After what happened on Rainier, after Emily, I needed to be somewhere new. Somewhere that didn't have her fingerprints on every trail marker and duty roster. Emily Vasquez was my partner for 6 years. Not romantic, professional. We worked the same sector, ran the same patrols, shared the same station truck that always smelled like wet dog and stale coffee. She was the best wilderness medic I'd ever seen. Calm in situations that would buckle most people. Funny in a way that snuck up on you. This dry delivery that made you laugh 10 seconds after she'd already moved on. In March of 2022, she went out on a solo patrol along the Carbon River Trail to check a report of a fallen Douglas fir blocking the path. She radioed in at 1410 to confirm the blockage and said she'd assess the best route for the maintenance crew. That was the last contact we had. When she didn't check in by 1600, we sent a team. They found the fallen tree. They found her radio, sitting upright on a stump like someone had placed it there carefully. They found her boot prints in the mud walking toward the tree, and then the prints just stopped. Not turned around, not scuffed or dragged, stopped, like she'd been lifted straight up. The investigation lasted 4 months and concluded nothing. I spent those 4 months not sleeping, not eating properly, and replaying her last radio call in my head until the words lost their meaning and became just the sound of her voice, which was worse. I put in for the Hoh transfer 2 weeks after the investigation closed. I told myself it was a fresh start. What it actually was, I think, was a form of self-punishment, trading one rainforest for another, wetter, darker, more isolated one, as if being uncomfortable would be a kind of penance for not being on that trail with her. The Hoh Rainforest Station is a small complex about a mile past the visitor center at the end of Upper Hoh Road. 2 buildings, the main station, which has offices, a break room, and a communications center, and the bunkhouse, which is where seasonal staff and new transfers sleep until they find housing in Forks, 30 miles away. When I arrived, the bunkhouse had 3 occupied rooms out of 8. By mid-November, it would have 1. Mine. I pulled in around 6 in the evening, which in October meant full dark. The rain was steady, not heavy, just relentless, the kind that fills every sound with a background hiss that makes you feel like you're listening through static. I parked next to a truck that looked like it had been old when Reagan was president and sat there for a minute with the engine running, looking at the station lights through the rain on my windshield. The forest pressed in on every side. I'd been in old growth before, Rainier has plenty of it, but the Hoh is different. The trees here are enormous. Sitka spruce, western red cedar, Douglas fir, some of them 300 feet tall and 800 years old. They grow so close together and carry so much moss and fern and lichen on their branches that the canopy forms a near-solid ceiling. In daylight, the forest floor gets a green underwater glow. At night, it gets nothing. The darkness between those trunks is total. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off, the darkness of a place that has never been lit. I cut the engine, grabbed my duffel, and walked to the station door. A man was standing in the doorway, backlit by the fluorescent light from the hallway. He was tall, maybe 6'2", lean in the way people get when they forget to eat on a regular schedule rather than trying to lose weight. Gray hair, close cropped, a face that looked like it had been left outdoors for several decades, not weathered in a rugged way, but just deeply lined, deeply tired. He was wearing the NPS uniform, but it hung on him loosely, like he'd been bigger once. Owen Mercer? That's me. Gene Lockhart, Senior Ranger. I run the Hoh station. He didn't offer his hand. He stepped aside to let me in. You eat? Grabbed something in Olympia. Good. Sit down. We need to talk before you start. He led me through the station to a small office at the back. 2 desks, one neat and one buried under papers. A topographic map of the Hoh River Valley covered most of the east wall, stuck with colored pins, green, yellow, red. More red than I would have expected. A scanner on a shelf crackled with occasional fragments of nothing. Gene closed the door, sat behind the neat desk, and looked at me for what felt like a long time. Your file says you're from Rainier. 11 years. Says you had an incident, lost a partner. Yes? Emily Vasquez. I felt my jaw tighten. Yes. Gene nodded slowly, not with sympathy, but with the careful expression of someone cataloging information. I'm sorry about that. I read the report. Strange circumstances. That's one word for it. We've had strange circumstances here too. Different kind of strange. Worse, maybe. And I need to know if you're going to be someone who can hear what I'm about to tell you and stay anyway, or if you're going to decide I'm crazy and put in for a transfer before morning. I've been doing backcountry work for over a decade. I'm not easy to rattle. Gene looked at me, and something in his eyes shifted. Not doubt, something closer to pity. Okay, he said. He opened the desk drawer, pulled out a laminated card, and set it face down on the desk between us. This isn't in any manual. You won't find it in any NPS regulation. It doesn't exist on paper anywhere except this card and 8 others like it, one for each ranger who's worked this station in the last 23 years. He turned the card over. It read, HOH Station, Operational Guidelines, Unofficial. 1. Do not leave established trails after sundown. If you are on patrol and sunset approaches, return to the station or the nearest shelter point. Do not shortcut through the forest. Stay on the trail. 2. If you hear someone calling for help from off-trail after dark, do not respond. Do not follow the voice. Radio the station and report the location and direction of the sound. Do not investigate alone under any circumstances. 3. Between November and February, do not enter the Hall of Mosses Trail after 3 p.m. If you are already on the trail and your watch reads 3 o'clock, turn around immediately. Do not finish the loop. 4. If you encounter a hiker or group on the trail who was not logged at the visitor center or any trailhead, do not engage them in conversation. Note their location, number, and direction of travel, and radio the station. If they speak to you first, respond only with directions to the nearest exit. Do not answer personal questions. 5. If the forest goes silent, no birds, no insects, no water sound, stop moving. Stand still. Do not speak. Wait until the sound returns. If the silence lasts more than 10 minutes, retreat the way you came. Do not run. 6. If you see a figure standing motionless among the trees, more than 30 feet from the trail, do not look at it directly. Note it in your peripheral vision only. Continue walking at your normal pace. Do not stop. Do not address it. Do not photograph it. Once you have passed it and can no longer see it from your periphery, do not turn around. 7. If your radio produces a voice you recognize, a colleague, a family member, anyone, on a frequency that should be static, turn the radio off. Do not respond. Report it when you reach the station and have the radio replaced. 8. The large spruce at the bend in the Hoh River Trail, approximately 4.3 miles from the trailhead, marked with 3 blazes cut into the bark at eye level, is not a tree. Do not touch it. Do not take samples. Do not rest against it. Pass it without stopping. 9. If you wake in the bunkhouse and the door to your room is open, but you closed it before sleeping, do not get out of bed. Do not close it. Lie still, face the wall, and wait for sunrise. You will hear things. You may feel things. Do not respond. I read the card twice. Then I read it a third time, slower, because the first 2 times my brain had been doing what brains do with impossible information, trying to reclassify it as something familiar, a joke, a hazing ritual, a test of some kind. I looked up at Jean. Is this serious? Does it look like a joke, Mercer? It looks like a list someone writes to scare the new guy. Jean leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under him. I've been at this station for 23 years. I wrote that card myself after my 3rd year, when I finally accepted that what I was experiencing wasn't going to stop. Before me, it was oral. Ranger to ranger, word of mouth, going back, we think, at least to the 70s, maybe longer. The Quileute and Quinault have stories about this valley that go back further than written record. They don't talk about them much. They definitely don't talk about them with Park Service. I set the card down. You're telling me there's something in this forest. I'm telling you there are conditions in this forest that don't have explanations I can give you, and there are behaviors that keep you safe within those conditions. I'm telling you that following those 9 points will keep you alive, and I'm telling you that every person who broke them, not everyone, but enough, isn't here anymore. He paused. Not dead, as far as I know. Just gone. The way your partner was gone. That landed. He saw it land. I'm not bringing up Emily to hurt you, he said. I'm bringing her up because you know what it looks like when someone vanishes without explanation. You've seen it. You've lived with it. Most new rangers I get, they haven't. They think I'm a crazy old man in the woods until they don't, and by then the learning curve is too steep. You're already past the part where you think the world makes perfect sense. That's worth something here. I didn't say anything for a while. The scanner crackled. Rain tapped on the window in irregular rhythms. Somewhere outside, an owl called, or something that sounded like an owl. Rule 6, I said. The figure in the trees. You're telling me there's something standing in the forest watching us. Sometimes. What is it? Gene shook his head. I don't know. I've been here 23 years, and I don't know what it is. I have observations, I have patterns, I have 23 years of data points that add up to a shape I can't name. But I don't know what it is, and I don't trust anyone who claims they do. The tree at the river trail. Rule 8, you're telling me a tree isn't a tree. I'm telling you to walk past it without stopping. That's not an answer. It's the only one that keeps you alive. I picked up the card again, ran my thumb over the lamination. Who printed these? I did. Office supply store in Forks. The girl at the counter didn't ask any questions. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Almost. How many rangers have you given this talk to? 8, including you. How many stayed? Jean looked at the map on the wall, at the red pins. 3 lasted more than a year. 2 are still with the service, both transferred out. 1 retired and moved to Arizona, won't answer my calls. He looked back at me. And Sarah Chen. She's our daytime patrol lead. Been here 4 years. You'll meet her tomorrow. You said 8, that's 4. What about the others? Jean stood up. Get some sleep, Mercer. Bunkhouse is the building behind the station. Room 3 has clean sheets. Breakfast is at 6. He walked to the door, then turned back. Keep your door closed tonight, and if it opens, follow Rule 9. He left. I sat in the office for another 10 minutes, reading the card, listening to the rain, and telling myself that Gene Lockhart was a damaged man in an isolated posting who'd built a mythology around natural phenomena he didn't understand. I almost believed it. But then I thought about Emily's radio, set upright on that stump. I thought about her boot prints that simply ended. And I thought about the fact that in 11 years of wilderness work, I'd never encountered anything I couldn't explain, until I did. And after that, the world never quite went back to the shape I thought it was. I went to the bunkhouse, room 3, clean sheets as promised, a single window facing the tree line, maybe 40 yards away. I closed the door, firmly, and pulled the curtain shut. But before I did, I looked out at the forest. The rain had picked up. In the security light's reach, I could see the first row of trees, spruce, cedar, all of them bearded with moss that hung in long curtains from every branch. Beyond that first row, nothing, absolute dark. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds, looking at that darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling. Not evidence, not reason, just the flat animal instinct that lives in the base of the skull, that the darkness was looking back. I closed the curtain. I closed my eyes. It took me 2 hours to fall asleep. The door stayed shut. My first daytime patrol was a revelation, not because anything strange happened. Nothing did. Because the Hoh Rainforest in daylight is one of the most extraordinary places I've ever seen, and I've spent my adult life in extraordinary places. Jean paired me with Sarah Chen for the first week. Sarah was 31, compact, efficient, with short black hair and the kind of calm, direct eye contact that made you feel like she was always evaluating whether you were going to be a problem. She'd come to the Hoh from a posting at Joshua Tree, which was about as different an environment as the Park Service could provide. When I asked why she'd transferred to the wettest place in the continental United States from one of the driest, she said, "I wanted to work somewhere things grew." Then she glanced at the moss covering a fallen nurse log, a solid carpet of green 4 inches thick stretching 60 feet. I got what I asked for. We started on the Spruce Nature Trail, the shortest loop, just over a mile. Sarah walked point and I followed, and she talked the way experienced rangers talk to new transfers, pointing out landmarks, hazard points, maintenance issues, all the mundane details that constitute 95% of the actual job. But the forest kept stealing my attention. The Hoh is a temperate rainforest, one of the few remaining in North America. The trees are ancient. Some of the Sitka spruce are over 300 feet tall and more than 500 years old. Their trunks are wider than my truck, and every surface, every trunk, every branch, every fallen log, every rock is covered in moss. Not a thin film, thick, luxuriant, three-dimensional moss in shades of green that I didn't know existed. Club moss hangs from branches and curtains that can be 6 feet long, swaying in the slightest breeze. Sword ferns grow in clusters as tall as my chest. Licorice ferns sprout directly from the moss on maple branches, so the branches themselves appear to be growing secondary forests. The light filters through the canopy in shafts of pale green gold, giving everything the quality of being underwater. The air smells like wet earth, decomposing wood, and something alive. Not a single scent, but a composite, the smell of a billion organisms doing their work. The sound is constant. The Hoh River, somewhere to the south, rain dripping from canopy to understory to forest floor in a layered percussion. Birds, winter wrens, varied thrushes, kinglets, calling in short, complex phrases that echo strangely off the moss-dampened surfaces. It was beautiful. It was the most alive place I had ever been. And for the first half of that first patrol, I managed to forget the laminated card in my jacket pocket. Sarah didn't mention the rules. She didn't bring up Jean's talk. She showed me where the trail maintenance gear was cached, where the emergency call boxes were, which sections flooded in heavy rain, and where the Roosevelt elk herds tended to congregate. Normal ranger work. Professional, focused, thorough. But I noticed things. She checked her watch more often than the patrol required. Not glancing, checking, deliberately, like someone who needed to know the precise time, not just the general idea of it. When we passed a section of the spruce trail where the trees grew particularly close on both sides, she picked up her pace. Not dramatically, maybe 10% faster. She didn't say anything about it, just walked a little quicker through that corridor of old growth and slowed when the trees opened up again. And at one point, about halfway through the loop, a varied thrush was singing in the understory to our left. A long, buzzing whistle, then silence, then another note on a different pitch. Normal, varied thrush behavior. But when the bird stopped mid-phrase and didn't resume, Sarah stopped walking. She stood perfectly still for maybe 15 seconds, head tilted slightly, listening. Then the bird started again, and she exhaled through her nose and kept walking. I didn't ask her about any of it. Not yet. It was my first day, and I was still telling myself that Jean was eccentric and the card was a local tradition, and I was a rational man who'd simply had too little sleep in a new place. But I noticed. We finished the Spruce Trail, drove to the Hoh River Trail, and hiked in about 3 miles. Sarah pointed out the maintenance issues, the erosion points, the spots where elk had damaged the trail edges. Standard stuff. The forest was the same and different. Bigger trees, wider river valley, more open stretches where the canopy broke and gray sky showed through. At mile marker 3, Sarah stopped and pointed east, off trail, into a dense stand of spruce. See that? I looked. Through the trees, maybe 70 yards out, I could see what appeared to be an unusually large spruce, bigger than its neighbors, with a trunk that seemed to absorb the light differently. It was hard to make out details at that distance through the moss curtains and undergrowth. "That's the tree," Sarah said. "Rule 8, we'll pass closer on the main trail about a mile ahead. You'll see the blazes." "What's wrong with it?" She turned back to the trail. "We don't stop near it. We don't study it. We don't talk about it near it." She started walking again. "Gene will tell you more when he thinks you're ready." "When he thinks I'm ready." The same phrasing you'd use about a child learning difficult information. I filed it away and followed her. We turned around at mile 4, well short of the tree, and headed back. The sun, such as it was, a general brightness behind the permanent overcast, was already tracking low. It was barely 2 in the afternoon, but the forest was dimming. Sarah checked her watch again. "We head back by 2:30 this time of year," she said, answering a question I hadn't asked. "Gets dark fast in the valley, and in winter," she trailed off, then finished, "in winter, we adjust our schedules." Rule 3. The Hall of Mosses, the 3 p.m. cutoff. She was already operating within the framework of the card without referencing it directly. The rules weren't a document to her, they were the job itself. We drove back to the station in the kind of quiet that isn't uncomfortable. 2 professionals who don't need to fill silence. The heater in the truck rattled. The wipers beat a steady rhythm. I watched the forest scroll past the windows, those enormous trees crowding the road, the moss hanging like something between decoration and intent. "Sarah." "Yeah." "How long did it take you before you believed it?" She didn't ask what I meant. She drove for another 30 seconds, eyes on the road. 9 days. What happened on day 9? She pulled into the station lot, killed the engine. The wipers stopped and rain immediately filled the windshield, blurring the world outside. "Ask me again after your first week. If you still need to ask, I'll tell you." She got out of the truck. I sat there for a minute, thinking about the bird that stopped singing and the trees she walked faster through and the watch she kept checking. Then I went inside. My first 3 days were uneventful. Patrols with Sarah, equipment orientation with Jean, paperwork, radio protocols, the administrative side of keeping a national forest operational with a skeleton winter crew. Jean ran a tight station despite, or maybe because of, whatever he believed about the forest. Radios checked twice daily, trail logs updated by every ranger after every patrol, weather monitoring, river level tracking, wildlife reports. The mundane infrastructure of land management, the staff was small. Jean, Sarah, myself, and 2 seasonal maintenance workers named Pete and Luis, who handled trail repair and facility upkeep. Pete was in his 50s, quiet, the kind of man who communicates primarily through the quality of his work. Luis was 26 and had the nervous energy of someone who talks a lot because silence bothers him. Both had been at the Hoh for 2 seasons. Both, I noticed, left the station before dark without exception. On the evening of my 3rd day, Gene and I were in the break room. He was doing paperwork. I was updating trail logs and drinking coffee that tasted like it had been made during the Clinton administration. The scanner muttered in the background, cycling through frequencies. Rain, always rain. Gene. The red pins on the map, in your office. He didn't look up. What about them? How many are there? 43. The number hit me physically. In how many years? Since I started keeping track, 23 years. But the incidents go back further than me. I just didn't have reliable data before 1999. He set his pen down and looked at me. Not all of those are disappearances. Some are encounters, sightings, incidents that didn't result in loss of life but that I documented. The disappearances are 14. 14 people in 23 years. That's a rate? That's a rate that's higher than any comparable wilderness area in the Pacific Northwest, adjusted for visitor volume. I've checked. And the NPS sees individual incidents. A hiker who didn't sign out. A camper who got lost. They don't see the pattern because each case is handled separately. Different investigators. Different years. The file gets stamped inconclusive and archived. Nobody's reading 23 years of inconclusive files side by side. He picked up his pen again. Except me. You've reported the pattern. Twice? Once in 2011, once in 2017. Both times I got a very polite letter thanking me for my diligence and suggesting I might benefit from the Employee Assistance Program. A thin smile. They thought I was having a breakdown. Were you? Gene looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something behind the professional composure, not offense, something older and more tired. I started sleeping with the light on in 2004. I haven't had a full night's sleep since 2008. My wife left in 2012 because I wouldn't transfer out and I couldn't explain why I needed to stay. My daughter calls on Christmas and my birthday. That's it. He straightened the papers in front of him. If that constitutes a breakdown, then yes. But the things I documented are real. The pins are real. The 14 people are real. And the rules work, Owen. That's the part I can't walk away from. The rules work. It was the first time he'd used my first name. I sat with that for a while. The scanner hissed. The coffee went cold. What's Rule 6? I asked. The figure. You said sometimes. What does that mean? Gene was quiet for a long time. Then he got up, refilled his coffee, sat back down. The first time I saw it was February of 2001. I was on the Hoh River Trail, about 3 miles in, coming back from a river gauge check. It was late afternoon, maybe 3:45, getting dark. I had my flashlight out and I was moving at a good clip because I knew the timeline. I came around a bend and I saw, in the trees, maybe 40 feet off the trail, standing between 2 big spruce, a figure. He said the word figure, the way you'd say the name of someone you didn't want to talk about. It was tall. Hard to say exactly how tall because of the angle and the moss and the light, but tall. And it was standing still. Completely, absolutely still. Not the stillness of a person waiting. People shift, people breathe, people adjust their weight. This was the stillness of a tree, like it had always been standing there and always would be. Could you make it out? Features? Clothing? It was dark. Mostly I saw the shape. Upright, narrow. The proportions were close to right. Close enough that your first thought is person. But something was wrong about it. The way it was standing, maybe. The angle of the limbs. I can't describe it precisely. It was like looking at something that knew what a person looked like but had learned from a description rather than observation. He took a long drink of coffee. I looked at it, full on, right at it, for maybe 4 or 5 seconds. And in those 4 or 5 seconds, something changed. Not it, me. I felt something I haven't felt before or since. It was like being seen, not looked at, not watched, seen. The way you'd feel if something opened you up and read every page. My chest got tight. My vision started to narrow, and I had this urge, this overwhelming physical urge, to walk toward it. Not curiosity, not courage, Compulsion, like a hook behind my sternum pulling me off the trail. He set the coffee down. Tom Aldridge was the ranger before me. He'd told me about the figure. He'd told me not to look at it directly. I hadn't listened because I thought Tom was an old man who drank too much, which he was, but that didn't mean he was wrong. I remembered his words right then, standing on that trail with my feet already turning toward the trees. Don't look at it straight on. You look at it straight on. It gets in. Gets in? His words. I broke eye contact, looked at the trail, kept walking. The compulsion faded over about 30 seconds, like a cramp releasing. By the time I reached the station, I felt normal, physically normal, but something had shifted. I knew Tom wasn't crazy. I knew the rules weren't superstition, and I knew I was going to stay at this station until I either understood what was out there or got too old to walk the trails. He looked at me across the table. Damo. That's rule 6. The figure appears. Not every day, not every week. Sometimes months go by and nothing. Then it's there, off the trail, in the trees, standing in that wrong stillness. If you see it in your peripheral vision and keep walking, it doesn't follow. It doesn't approach. You pass it the way you'd pass a rock formation or a stump. But if you look at it, truly look, make that direct connection, it changes. It engages. And the people who engaged with it, he gestured vaguely toward his office, toward the map, toward the red pins. Not all of them? No, not all of them. Some people looked and survived. Some people even stopped. But they were changed afterward. Nightmares, behavioral shifts. One ranger in 2009 started sleepwalking. We'd find him at the tree line at 3 a.m, barefoot facing the forest. He transferred out after 2 months. He's in Tucson now, works at a Costco, won't go near a forest. And the ones who didn't survive? Gene shook his head slowly. They walked off the trail, toward it, and they didn't come back. The scanner crackled. A fragment of weather data from the coastal station, numbers and codes that meant rain, more rain, continued rain. Gene reached over and turned the volume down without looking. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow I'm taking you on the river trail, full length. I want you to see the tree. I pushed back from the table, rinsed my mug, walked to the door, turned back. Gene, the figure. You said the proportions were close to right, close enough that your first thought is person. Yes? What's your second thought? He looked at me for a long time. That nothing on earth stands that still. That night, in room 3 of the bunkhouse, I lay in bed and listened to the rain. It was heavier now, a sustained downpour that turned the roof into a drum. Water ran off the eaves in sheets. The forest, 40 yards from my window, was invisible behind the curtain in the dark. I thought about Gene's story, the figure between the spruce trees, the compulsion, the hook behind the sternum. I thought about Rule 6 and the careful specificity of its language. Do not look at it directly. Not don't approach or don't interact, don't look. As if seeing it clearly was itself the danger, as if the connection between eye and object was a bridge that something could cross. I thought about Emily, her radio on the stump, her boot prints that ended. I thought about the 14 red pins and the phrase ceased to exist. And then, at approximately 1:40 in the morning, I heard something that made me stop thinking entirely. A voice, a woman's voice, coming from outside from the direction of the tree line. It was calling for help, not screaming, not frantic, just a voice, clear and steady through the rain saying, "Hello? Is anyone there? I need help. I'm lost. Hello?" I sat up in bed. My training kicked in immediately. Lost hiker, disoriented in the dark, hypothermia risk in this weather. I was already swinging my legs to the floor when Rule 2 surfaced in my mind, like a hand pressing against my chest. If you hear someone calling for help from off-trail after dark, do not respond. Do not follow the voice. I sat on the edge of my bed. The voice continued. "Please, I can see the lights. I know someone's there. Please help me." She sounded cold. She sounded scared. She sounded exactly like a lost hiker would sound on a night like this, rational enough to move toward light, frightened enough to call out, cold enough that waiting wasn't an option. Everything in my training said, go. A person is in danger. You are a park ranger. You go. Everything Gene had told me said, don't. I reached for my radio, keyed it to the station frequency. "Station, this is Mercer in the bunkhouse. I'm hearing a voice outside, female, calling for help. Direction is north, toward the tree line, requesting guidance." The radio hissed for 3 seconds, then Gene's voice, calm and immediately awake, as if he'd been waiting. "Copy, Mercer. Stay inside. Do not respond to the voice. Do not open your door. I'm monitoring from the station. This is a Rule 2 event. Confirm you understand." "Confirmed. Staying inside." "Good. Turn your light off. Get back in bed. It'll stop." I turned off the lamp. The room went dark. Through the curtain, through the rain, the voice continued. "I can hear you in there. I heard the radio. Please, I'm so cold. Why won't you help me?" My hand was gripping the edge of the mattress hard enough that my knuckles ached. Every instinct I had was screaming at me. A person was outside, in the rain, in the dark, asking for help. And I was lying in bed with the lights off, pretending I couldn't hear her. The voice moved. It had been coming from the tree line, 40 yards out. Now it was closer, 30 yards, 20. "I can see the building. Please, just open the door. I'm right here." Then, just outside my window, maybe 5 feet from the glass. "Owen." My breath stopped. It knew my name. "Owen, please. I'm so scared. It's so dark out here." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I lay in bed with my face turned toward the wall and my heart slamming against my ribs, and I did not move. The voice stayed at the window for what my watch later told me was 11 minutes. It asked for help. It used my name 4 more times. At one point it said something that nearly broke me. "Emily told me to find you. She said you'd help." That was when I put the pillow over my head and pressed it against my ears and held it there until my arms shook. Because the voice was wrong. It had to be wrong. Emily was gone. Emily's footprints ended in the mud on a trail in Mount Rainier, and she was gone. And nothing in this forest knew her name. Nothing could know her name. Nothing. The voice stopped at 2:03 a.m. One moment it was there. The next, silence. Just rain. Just the steady, impersonal percussion of water falling from sky to canopy to earth. I didn't sleep again that night. At 6 in the morning, I walked to the station. Gene was at the table with coffee. He looked at me, and his face showed no surprise at what he saw in mine. He poured a second cup and pushed it across to me. "How did it know my name?" I asked. "I don't know. It mentioned Emily." Gene's hand paused midway to his mouth. He set the cup down. "Your partner? From Rainier?" "It said Emily told it to find me. That Emily said I'd help." Something moved across Gene's face. Not shock, but a deepening of something that was already there. A confirmation of something he'd feared. "That's new," he said quietly. "It's never referenced someone from outside the valley before." He was quiet for a while. Then he reached across the table and put his hand on my arm. It was the first time he'd touched me. "It lies, Owen. Whatever it is, whatever it knows, it lies. It takes true things and bends them into shapes that make you open the door. That's what it does. That's all it does." I looked at my coffee. Steam rose in a thin curl and disappeared. "I almost opened the door," I said. "I know," Gene said. "Everyone almost opens the door." He let go of my arm, picked up his coffee, drank. "It was your 4th night," he said. "For most people it waits a week or 2, gets a sense of you first, learns the terrain." He looked out the window, toward the tree line, toward the place where the voice had stood in the dark. "It moved fast with you. I don't know if that means it's hungry or if it means it already knew you before you arrived." That sentence sat between us like something with weight. I drank my coffee. It was terrible. I drank all of it. "You said we're going to the tree today," I said. "Rule 8. Gene nodded. "Good," I said. "I want to see it." Gene studied me for a moment. Then he stood, rinsed his cup, and pulled on his rain jacket. "Finish your coffee," he said. "We leave in 10. The rain had not stopped. As far as I could tell, it would never stop. I finished my coffee, zipped my jacket, and stepped outside into a morning that was gray and wet and alive with the sound of water moving through a forest that had been here for millennia and would be here long after every ranger who'd ever carried a laminated card was gone. The tree line stood where it always stood. The moss hung where it always hung. And somewhere in the spaces between the trunks, In the dark, that daylight softened but never fully reached. Something waited with the patience of a thing that had nothing but time. I followed Jean to the truck. The drive to the Hoh River trailhead took 12 minutes. Neither of us spoke. Jean drove the way he did everything, deliberately, without wasted motion, both hands on the wheel, eyes scanning the road and the tree line in a pattern so practiced it had become autonomic. The truck's heater fought a losing battle against the damp. The wipers carved arcs through the rain. We parked at the trailhead and geared up. Radio, flashlight, first aid kit, bear spray. The standard loadout. Jean added a second flashlight and a handheld GPS unit, which he clipped to his belt without comment. It was 8:15 a.m., full daylight, or what passed for it in the Hoh in October. The canopy filtered everything to a muted green-gray, like looking at the world through old glass. "Stay on the trail," Jean said. "Match my pace. When we get to the tree, I'll tell you what I know. Don't touch anything. Don't step off the path." Understood. We hiked in. The first 2 miles were the section I'd covered with Sarah, familiar now, or as familiar as a place could be after 3 days. The moss, the ferns, the massive trunks, the sound of water everywhere. A pair of Roosevelt elk stood in a clearing near mile 1, a cow and a yearling, watching us with the calm disinterest of animals that had never been hunted. Normal, peaceful even. Past mile 2, the forest changed, not dramatically. There was no visible border, no sign. But the trees grew closer, the canopy thickened. The green light on the forest floor deepened, and the spaces between the trunks grew darker. The understory was denser here, thick tangles of salal and Oregon grape and sword fern that obscured the ground beyond the first 10 feet. You could hide an army in that undergrowth and never see a helmet. Jean's pace didn't change, but something in his posture did. His shoulders drew up slightly. His head movements became more deliberate, scanning left, scanning right, the way a point man moves through uncertain terrain. I recognized it because I'd done the same thing 1,000 times in rough country. He was reading the environment for threats. Except Jean wasn't watching for bears or unstable ground. He was watching the spaces between the trees. At mile 3.8, he slowed. "Quarter mile ahead. You'll see it on the left side of the trail. The blazes are at eye level. 3 horizontal cuts in the bark, about 6 inches apart, made by a ranger named Dale Worthington in 1987. Dale was the one who figured out the boundary. Boundary? How close you can get before it affects you. 20 feet is the line. Inside 20 feet, people report headaches, disorientation, nausea. Inside 10 feet, he shook his head. Don't go inside 10 feet. Has anyone? Dale did, once. He was trying to take a core sample for a dendrochronology study, scientific curiosity. He was a good ranger, a careful man. He got about 6 feet from the trunk and dropped the bore. His hands had gone numb. He said afterward that he could hear something, not with his ears but inside his skull, like a frequency below hearing, a pressure. He backed away and the sensation stopped. He made the blazes the next day and added Rule 8 to the list. Where's Dale now? Died in 2003. Liver cancer. Unrelated, as far as anyone can tell. But he never went near that tree again, and he made sure no one else did either. We rounded a gentle bend in the trail, and I saw it. The spruce was enormous, larger than any tree I'd seen in the Hoh, and I'd seen trees that were centuries old and wide enough to drive through. This one was different in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. Its trunk was perhaps 14 feet in diameter, dark with moisture, covered in the same moss that covered everything. Its branches started high up and spread wide, merging with the canopy. It looked like a tree. It had bark and moss and branches and roots that humped the ground around its base. But something was wrong. The moss on the neighboring trees grew in natural patterns, thickest on the north side, thinning where light reached, interrupted by knots and broken branches. The moss on this tree was uniform, perfectly, unnaturally uniform, every surface covered to the same depth, the same shade, the same texture. As if the moss wasn't growing on the tree but was part of it, or as if the tree was wearing the moss the way a person wears clothing. The 3 blazes were cut into the bark at eye level, just as Jean described. Old cuts, darkened with age but still visible. Scars in the wood that hadn't healed the way tree scars heal. They looked raw, like cuts in skin that refused to close. "Keep walking," Gene said. His voice was steady but lower than usual. Normal pace, don't stop. I walked. As I passed, I looked at the tree from my peripheral vision, the way Rule 6 instructed me to handle the figure. It was maybe 25 feet from the trail edge. From this distance, I could see the base more clearly. The roots were massive, spreading across the ground in ridges that looked muscular. Between two of the largest roots, there was a gap, a dark space, maybe 2 feet wide, that descended into the earth. And in that moment, as I walked past at a steady pace and looked from the corner of my eye, I felt something. Not the hook that Gene described with the figure, not compulsion, something different, a heaviness, a gravity in my chest as if the air near the tree had mass. My steps slowed without my permission, and I had to consciously force myself to maintain pace. It lasted maybe 15 seconds, the time it took to walk from the tree's nearest point to where the trail curved away. Then it was gone, and the forest felt normal again, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Gene didn't speak until we were 100 yards past. Then he stopped, turned to me, and asked, "What did you feel?" Heaviness, like the air was thicker. My pace wanted to slow down. He nodded. "That's consistent. At 25 feet, that's about right. The effect scales with proximity. And it's stronger in winter, stronger at night, strongest in the weeks around the solstice, December through early January. We avoid this section of trail entirely during that period. Route patrols around it." "What is it, Gene? And don't tell me you don't know. You've been here 23 years. You must have a theory." He started walking again. I fell into step beside him. "A theory isn't knowledge," he said. "A theory is a story I tell myself so I can sleep. But yes, I have one." He was quiet for 50 yards, gathering his thoughts or deciding how much to share. "I think the tree is a fixed point, an anchor for whatever operates in this forest. The figure, the voices, the silence events. I think they're all expressions of the same thing, and I think that thing is rooted there. Not metaphorically, literally. Whatever it is, it grows the way the forest grows. Slowly, patiently. It's been here longer than the Park Service, longer than the logging roads, probably longer than any human settlement on this peninsula. The Kino elders I've spoken to, the two who would speak to me at all, they used a word I can't pronounce that translates roughly to the one that waits in the wood. Not woods, plural. Wood. The material. As if it's inside the trees themselves. And the people who disappear?" Gene stopped walking. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, somewhere between sorrow and the careful neutrality of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say. "I think they're taken. I don't know where. I don't know why. I don't know if they're alive in any way we'd recognize. But I think the entity, the thing in the wood, draws them in and they go and they don't come back. The voice is the lure. The figure is the lure. The tree is the mouth, maybe. The place they go in." He paused. "I have no evidence for any of this. It's pattern recognition from a man with 23 years of data and no peer review. Make of it what you will." We hiked back in silence. The forest held its cathedral stillness around us. 2 miles from the trailhead, a winter wren sang from somewhere in the ferns, a rapid, complex stream of notes that lasted almost 10 seconds. The sound was startlingly beautiful, and for a moment the Hoh was just a forest, just a wet and ancient and magnificent forest, and I was just a ranger doing his job. Then we passed the section where Sarah had walked faster, and I noticed Gene walked faster through it too, and the moment was gone. November came. The rain intensified. The days shortened until patrol windows were barely 5 hours of adequate light. Pete and Luis finished the season's trail work and left. Pete with a handshake, Luis with a wave, and a visible relief that I understood better now. The skeleton crew was 3, Gene, Sarah, and me, and the forest pressed closer. The silence event started on November 9th. I was on a solo patrol. Gene had cleared me for solo work after 2 weeks, which Sarah later told me was the fastest he'd ever approved anyone, on the Spruce Nature Trail, mid-morning. Overcast, rain, the usual. I was checking a drainage culvert near the halfway point when the world went quiet. Not gradually, instantly. One moment, rain patter, bird song, river, the whole layered soundtrack of the Hoh. The next, nothing. As if someone had pressed mute on reality. Rule 5. I stopped moving. I stood completely still, one hand on the culvert grate, the other at my side. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. The silence was total. Not the silence of a quiet room. Rooms have refrigerator hum, air circulation, the house settling. This was the silence of a vacuum. The silence of a place where sound had been removed. I could hear my own blood moving through my ears, and that was all. I stood there for 4 minutes. I know because I watched my watch, the second hand ticking in a silence so complete I imagined I could hear the mechanism. Then it came back. Not gradually, instantly. Birds, rain, river, all at once, as if the mute button had been released. A varied thrush resumed its song mid-phrase, as if it had been singing the whole time and only I had been unable to hear it. Or as if it too had been frozen and had started again exactly where it stopped. I radioed Jean. Silence event, Spruce Trail, mile 0.6, duration approximately 4 minutes, no visual anomalies. Copy, come back in. When I reached the station, Jean was standing at the map in his office, pressing a yellow pin into the Spruce Trail near the half-mile mark. There were 17 other yellow pins on the map. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence events happened 3 more times that month, once on the river trail, once near the visitor center, empty of visitors now, and once at the station itself, which Jean said had only happened twice before in his tenure. That one lasted 9 minutes. The 3 of us stood in the break room, not speaking, not moving, listening to the absolute absence of sound, while rain ran silently down the windows. When the sound returned, Sarah put both hands flat on the table and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath underwater. "It's early this year," she said to Jean. He nodded. He'd already pulled out his logbook. 3 weeks early. That night, Sarah told me her day 9 story. We were in the break room after dark, Jean in his office doing paperwork, the station locked up tight. She poured 2 mugs of the terrible coffee and sat across from me. My 9th day, I was on the Hall of Mosses trail. It was November, mid-afternoon. I was heading back, early, because Jean had drilled the 3 p.m. rule into me. I was at the far end of the loop, where the maples are thickest, the ones completely covered in moss, the ones that look like they're wearing fur coats. She held her mug with both hands. There was a group on the trail ahead of me, a family, man, woman, 2 kids. They were walking toward me, coming the opposite direction around the loop. They were dressed for hiking, rain gear, boots, backpacks, completely normal. Except they hadn't signed in at the trailhead register, and they hadn't come through the visitor center. I would have noticed. It was late season. We had maybe 5 visitors that whole day. Rule 4. Rule 4, I thought about it, but they looked so normal. The kids were maybe 8 and 10. The woman was laughing at something the man said. They looked like every family I'd ever seen on a trail in my life. She drank, set the mug down. They got closer, about 30 feet away. The man saw me and waved, big friendly wave, and then the woman said, she looked right at me and said, "Sarah, thank God we've been walking for hours. Can you help us find the way out?" She knew your name. She knew my name. I wasn't wearing a name tag. I'd forgotten it that morning. She knew my name and she said they'd been walking for hours, but the Hall of Mosses loop is 1.1 miles. You can walk it in 30 minutes. What did you do? I followed the rule. I said, "The exit is that direction," and pointed back the way I'd come. Then I stepped off the trail, just to the edge, to let them pass. The man smiled and said, "Thank you." The woman said, "You're so kind." The kids didn't say anything. The kids hadn't said anything the entire time. She looked at her coffee. They passed me. I kept walking, and after about 20 seconds, I realized something. I couldn't hear their footsteps. The trail was gravel in that section. You can't walk on gravel without making sound. But behind me, there was nothing. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to turn around so badly. But Rule 6 was in my head, not the figure, but the principle. Don't look back at the thing that doesn't make sense. Did you look? No, she paused. But I walked faster, and when I reached the trailhead, I checked the register. No one had signed in besides me. I checked the parking lot. My truck was the only vehicle, and when I went back to the station and told Gene, he just nodded and pressed a red pin into the map near the Hall of Mosses. She stood up, rinsed her mug. That family wasn't real, Owen. Or it was real, but it wasn't a family. It was something wearing a family the way you'd wear a costume. And the kids not talking, not once, not a word. That's the detail that kept me up for 3 weeks. Because whatever was wearing the adults hadn't figured out how to make children talk. It could do adults. It couldn't do kids. Not yet. She looked at me. That was 4 years ago. I don't know if it's learned since then. December. The solstice approached. Gene pulled us off the river trail entirely. No patrols past mile 2.5, nowhere near the tree. The Hall of Mosses closed to all traffic after noon, though by December there were no visitors anyway. The three of us ran the station on a winter protocol that Gene had developed over 2 decades. Shortened patrol routes, double radio checks, no one alone after 2 p.m., all personnel inside the station by 3:30. The forest was different in December, darker. The canopy, even without full leaf coverage, was so thick with moss and epiphytes that the light barely reached the ground. Patrols felt like walking through a tunnel that happened to be made of living wood. The rain was constant, but colder now, almost sleet some mornings, and the river ran high and fast and brown with sediment, and the entity, whatever it was more active. The silence events increased to twice a week. I heard the voice outside the bunkhouse 3 more times, though I'd stopped staying in the bunkhouse by then. Gene had offered me the spare room in the station, and I'd accepted without pride. The station felt safer. Not safe. Safer. The voice still found me there. On December 14th, at 2:20 in the morning, I woke to a sound that stopped my heart. Not the woman's voice, not the generic plea for help. Emily's voice. Owen. Owen, can you hear me? It's Em. I'm at the tree line. Owen, I've been trying to find you. I lay in the dark with my eyes open and my hands flat against the mattress, and I listened to my dead partner's voice coming through the wall. It was perfect. The cadence, the slight roughness she always had in the mornings, the way she said my name with a small emphasis on the first syllable. It was her. Owen, I'm not dead. I'm right here. Something happened on the Carbon River Trail. I don't know what, but I'm here now. I walked a long time. I followed something and it brought me here. Please open the door. I pressed my hands harder into the mattress. Owen, I know you think I'm gone. I know they told you I'm gone. But I'm standing right outside. I'm cold and I'm tired, and I've been walking for so long. Please, just look. Just open the door and look at me. That's all I'm asking. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, because it sounded like her. It sounded exactly like her. And the part of me that had spent 8 months grieving, the part that replayed her last radio call at night, that saw her boot prints in every mud track on every trail, that part wanted to believe it so badly that my body was already moving, my legs swinging toward the floor, my hand reaching for the door handle. I caught myself with my fingers 3 inches from the knob. And in the silence that followed my movement, the voice said something that broke the illusion. Owen, don't you want to know what happened to me? I can show you. I can take you there. Emily would never have said that. Emily, who was practical and blunt and had no patience for mystery, would have said, Open the damn door, Mercer. I'm freezing. She would have banged on the wall. She would have insulted my taste in coffee. She would not have offered to take me somewhere. Whatever was outside my door had Emily's voice. It had her cadence, but it didn't have her. It had studied the recording. It hadn't known the person. I pulled my hand back. I lay down. I faced the wall. The voice spoke for 47 more minutes. I know because I watched the clock the way a drowning man watches the surface. It said things that were almost right. It referenced patrols we'd run together, but got the locations slightly wrong. It mentioned a joke she used to make about the station coffee, but delivered the punchline with the wrong emphasis. It was close. So close that any stranger would have believed it. But I wasn't a stranger. I was the person who'd spent 6 years with her, and the gaps between the performance and the reality were everything. At 3:11 a.m., it stopped. The rain continued. The forest breathed. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I told Gene. He wrote everything down. When I described the near miss, my hand reaching for the door, he stopped writing and looked at me. 3 inches, he said. 3 inches. He was quiet for a long time. Then, it's getting better at this, the personal details, the specificity. When I started, the voices were generic. Lost hiker, scared woman, now it's learning names, voices, personal histories. It's adapting on a timescale I can observe. He closed his notebook. I don't know what that means for the future. I don't know what it means that it's getting smarter. But I know the rules still work. They work because they're based on behavior, not on understanding. You don't have to know what it is to know what it does. December 21st, the solstice, the longest night. Jean declared a lockdown, no patrols, all personnel in the station from noon onward, doors locked, windows shuttered, radios on, but volume low. He'd done this every solstice for 23 years. It's most active tonight, he said. Every year. The silence lasts longer, the voices are louder. The figure has been seen closer to the trail, and once, in 2014, on the trail itself. We sat in the break room with the lights on, and the coffee hot and the rain hammering the roof. Sarah read a book. Jean did paperwork. I pretended to read, but mostly listened. The scanner cycled through empty frequencies. The clock ticked. At 6:47 p.m., the silence came. It fell like a blade. One moment, rain, scanner, clock. The next, nothing. Not even the clock. I looked at it, and the second hand was still moving, but I couldn't hear it. The rain was still hitting the roof, but it made no sound. Sarah looked up from her book. Jean set down his pen. We sat in silence, literally, in the total, annihilating absence of sound. It lasted 41 minutes. Jean timed it, the longest silence event in his 23 years of records. 41 minutes in which the three of us sat in a building surrounded by ancient forest and heard nothing at all. Not rain, not wind, not our own breathing, not the scrape of a chair or the tap of a pen. Nothing. During that silence, the door to the station rattled once. Not the wind. There was no wind sound to accompany it. Just the door, in perfect silence, moving in its frame as if something had tested the handle. Jean looked at the door. Sarah looked at Jean. I looked at my hands, which were steady, which surprised me. Nobody moved. The sound came back at 7:28 p.m., all at once, a wall of noise. Rain, wind, the scanner's hiss, the heater's rattle, so sudden it felt like being slapped. Sarah gasped. Jean checked his watch and wrote the time in his notebook with a hand that was not quite steady. We didn't speak about it that night. Jean poured bourbon, the first time I'd seen him drink, and poured 3 glasses without asking. We drank in the break room with the lights on and the doors locked, and at some point, Sarah said, 6 more months and it starts to back off, and Jean said, it always backs off. And I understood that they were talking about the entity the way farmers talk about weather. Not something you fight, something you survive, something you wait out year after year because the land is yours to tend, and leaving isn't something you do. Spring came. The days lengthened. The rain eased, not stopped. The rain never stops in the Hoh, but softened. Visitors began to trickle back. The forest exploded with growth, the moss impossibly greener, the ferns unfurling, the canopy filling with birdsong. And the entity withdrew. Not disappeared. I don't believe it disappears, but it contracted, like a tide pulling back. The silence events dropped to once a month, then less. The voices stopped. The figure was not seen. Jean retired on April 15th, 2024. He'd been in the Park Service for 31 years and at the Hoh station for 23. On his last day, he handed me a binder. Inside were his notebooks, every observation, every incident, every pin on the map documented with date, time, conditions, and details. 23 years of data gathered by a man who knew no one would ever read it officially. The rules work, he said. We were standing by his truck packed with the possessions of a man who'd lived in a ranger station for over 2 decades and was leaving with what fit in a pickup bed. Follow them. Teach them. Don't try to understand the thing in the forest. Just manage it. Where will you go? My daughter's in Boise. She invited me to stay a while. He looked at the tree line. The moss swayed in a light breeze. The forest was beautiful in the morning light. green and gold and impossibly alive. "I'll miss it," he said, and his voice was rough in a way I hadn't heard before. "God help me, I'll miss it." He drove away. I watched the truck disappear down Upper Hoh Road. Then I went inside and sat at his desk, my desk now, and opened the binder to the first page. In July, a new transfer arrived. Angela Reeves, 28, from a posting at Crater Lake. Confident, sharp, ready for the next step in her career. She pulled into the station at 6 in the evening, and I was standing in the doorway the way Jean had stood for me. "Angela Reeves, that's me." "Owen Mercer, Senior Ranger. I run the Hoh Station." I stepped aside. "You eat?" Grabbed something and poured Angela's. "Good. Sit down. We need to talk before you start." I led her to the office. I sat behind the neat desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out the laminated card, the same one Jean had given me, now worn at the edges from my pocket, and set it face down between us. She looked at it. She looked at me. I saw the same expression I must have worn in that same chair. Curiosity, skepticism, the confidence of someone who hasn't yet been shown the shape of something they can't explain. "Your file says you're from Crater Lake." 3 years. "Good place, good experience." I paused. "What I'm about to tell you isn't in any manual. It isn't in any NPS regulation. It's going to sound like the kind of thing a crazy man says to scare new hires in an isolated posting." "Okay. It's not. Every word is real. And if you follow what's on this card, you'll survive your time here. If you don't," I glanced at the map on the wall, Jean's pins, and the new ones I'd added. "I can't guarantee anything." I turned the card over. She read it. I watched her face go through the stages: amusement, confusion, doubt, the first flicker of something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it. "Is this serious? Does it look like a joke, Reeves?" The words came out of my mouth in Jean's cadence, and I felt the weight of them, the weight of being the one in the chair, the one who knows, the one who has to make someone believe. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Rule 6, the figure, what is it?" I leaned back. The chair creaked. The scanner murmured. Rain tapped at the window. "I don't know," I said. "I've been here 2 years, and I don't know what it is. But I'll tell you what I tell everyone. The rules work. Follow them, and you'll be okay." She looked at the card again. Outside, the sun was setting behind the canopy, the light going gold to gray. In an hour, it would be dark. In the dark, the forest would become something other than what it was in daylight, not a different place. The same place, with different rules. "I'll stay," she said. "Good." I stood. "Bunkhouse is behind the station. Room 3, clean sheets, keep your door closed." She left. I sat in the office and listened to the rain and looked at the map on the wall with its constellation of colored pins, green for routine, yellow for silence events, red for the encounters and disappearances that the forest kept collecting like a debt that could never be fully paid. Somewhere out there, past the tree line, past the ancient spruce and the hanging moss and the darkness that daylight softened but never fully reached, something waited. It had waited before Jean. It had waited before Dale. It had waited before the first ranger set foot in the Hoh River Valley, and it would wait after the last one left. My job was not to understand it. My job was not to defeat it. My job was to tend the boundary between what we know and what we don't, and to make sure the people who come here, the hikers, the tourists, the new transfers with their confidence and their questions, go home again. The rules work. I follow them. I teach them. And on the nights when the voice comes, when it uses Emily's voice, when it says my name with that small emphasis on the first syllable, when it asks me to open the door, I lie still, and I face the wall, and I wait for morning. It always comes. Morning always comes. But the nights are getting longer, and the voice is getting closer to right. And one of these days, I'm afraid it's going to say something that sounds exactly like her. Not almost, not close. Exactly. And I don't know what I'll do then. I don't know what any of us would do. Keep your doors closed, follow the trails, and if the forest goes quiet, if every bird and every insect and every sound you take for granted suddenly stops, stand still. Stand still and wait, because the silence isn't empty, it's listening.